He caught an Apache girl by accident, and what she did next froze the whole village. The rope was meant for wild horses, not a person. Colton Miles had set the snare and walked back to his barn expecting to find hooves, not a quiet young woman sitting on a bale of hay. Her dark eyes watched him like she was reading his thoughts. It made his skin crawl. "I thought you'd fight," he said, voice tight. "You should have been trying to get free." The knife lay within reach on the floor, the same knife that had been there since dawn. She didn't move toward it. Instead, she tilted her head, and a small, strange smile touched her lips. "I know," she said. Colton's eyes drifted upward. Fresh marks had been carved into the wooden beam above her, symbols he'd never seen before. The cuts looked new, as if they had been made since yesterday. They looked like a kind of message pulsing in the dim barn light. "Who taught you our language?" he asked, barely speaking. Her smile widened, but something in her gaze turned cold. "The same person who told me about the 3 riders coming for your village. The ones not coming to trade," cold ran through Colton. "There shouldn't be riders." The nearest settlement was 2 days away, and no one had passed this road in weeks. He would have known. He would have seen them. Yet when he looked at her, a terrible thought took hold. She knew something about Willowbrook that he did not. Something that explained why she had let herself be caught. Something that made her look as if she held every card. Out in the canyon, the sound of hooves began to echo. Colton grabbed his rifle from the wall, his hands shaking as the sound grew closer. 3 horses, just like she'd said. But how could she know those marks? He asked, pointing to the carvings. "What do they mean?" Ayana's face turned serious. "Danger signs," she said simply. "My people carved them to warn of threats. I carved these while you slept." She pointed toward the barn door. "Those riders aren't passing through. They're here for something specific. How do you know that?" Colton demanded, checking his rifle. The metal click felt loud in the quiet barn. "Because I've been tracking them for 3 days." Her voice stayed calm, matter of fact. "They burned a family 2 settlements north. Took everything. Left no witnesses." Colton felt the blood drain from his face. "The Morrison family lived 2 settlements north. He traded with them just last month." "You're lying," he said, but he didn't believe it. Ayana kept her dark eyes on him. The woman had red hair, wore a blue dress with white flowers. The man had a crescent scar above his left eyebrow. Colton's rifle nearly slipped from his hand. She'd described Martha and Bill Morrison perfectly. Things no one could know unless they'd seen them recently, or had seen what happened. "They're looking for someone," she whispered. "Someone who saw them that night. Someone who can name them." The horses stopped outside the barn. Voices, rough, angry, moved across the ground. "You sure this is the place, Pike? Track leads right here. Girl went in, never came out." Colton stared at Ayana. They weren't random raiders. They were hunting her. She had led them straight to his property. "Straight to Willowbrook. You brought them here," he said, rage and fear warring in his chest. "You brought killers to my home." Ayana's face stayed calm, almost unreadable. "No, Colton Miles, I brought them exactly where I wanted them." Boots hit the ground. 3 sets of footsteps came up to the barn door. The boards creaked and 3 men stepped into the light. The leader was tall, lean, with cold blue eyes that swept the barn like a man who expected to find prey. A jagged scar ran from his temple to his jaw. "Well, well," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Looks like we found ourselves a little Apache bird." His gaze shifted to Colton, the man who had set the snare. Colton raised his rifle, though his hands shook. "This is my property. You're trespassing." The scarred man laughed, a sound that felt like gravel. "Property don't mean much out here, friend. Especially when you're hiding someone who needs to disappear." The second man, shorter and stockier, shifted nervously. "She saw everything at the Morrison place. Can't let her live," he said. Pike, the leader, smiled in a way that had no humor in it. "Oh, she ain't living past today. Question is whether you go with her, or if you're smart enough to walk away." Colton's mind raced. These men had been the ones who burned the Morrison homestead. They'd tracked Ayana for days to make sure no witness survived. But when he glanced at her, Ayana wasn't looking at Pike or his men. Her eyes were fixed somewhere behind them, near the barn entrance. For a moment the barn held its breath. Colton stood with his rifle, the 3 riders inside the barn, the girl who had let herself be snared sitting silent on the hay. Outside, the canyon wind carried the distant thud of hooves and the weight of what would come next. She spoke like she owned the moment, calm, steady, no tremor in her voice. "I have a counter-proposal," Ayana said. Pike cocked an eyebrow and spat a laugh. "A patched-up girl wants to bargain. This'll be a show." "You're right about one thing," Ayana went on, rising slowly to her feet. "Someone here is going to die today. But you're wrong about who." The third man, who had been watchful and silent until now, shifted uneasily. "Pike, something don't feel right." "Why ain't she scared?" he muttered. Colton heard it then. A soft shuffle outside, careful and practiced. Footsteps moving around the barn like a ghost tide. Pike's hand went toward his gun. Ayana only smiled that same quiet, distant smile. "You shouldn't have followed me alone," she said. "My people don't forgive killers." The barn seemed to hold its breath. An arrow thudded through the boards, embedding in the beam inches from Pike's head. The sound snapped the room into a new reality. They were outgunned and surrounded. "Nobody move," a deep voice called from the dark. "Drop your weapons and step away from the girl." Pike froze, pistol halfway out. Through the slats, Colton could make out shadows and shapes. At least 6 Apache warriors, spaced and still, surrounding the building. The stocky man finally whispered, panic raw in his voice. "We covered our tracks. Nobody followed us." Ayana stepped forward, unshaken. "You didn't cover them from us," she said. She pointed toward the door. "My brother has tracked you since you left the Morrison place. Every camp, every mistake, your brother," Colton echoed, bewildered. "Noel, war leader of our band," Ayana said simply. "He's been tracking these killers to bring them to justice for what they did to innocent people." She looked at Colton. "We have no quarrel with this rancher. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Pike spat on the dirt. "Her Apache justice means we all die here," he growled. "Not all of you," Ayana answered. Her eyes sharpened. "My people aren't hunting the rancher." The silent killer lunged for Colton's rifle, as if to take one last shot and die with it. But Ayana moved faster. She seized the knife that had sat near her the whole time and threw it in one fluid motion. The blade found the man's shoulder, spun him, and sent him crashing into a feed barrel. "That was your warning," she said coldly. "The next one won't be outside." A voice from the dark called again. "Pike Morrison, you and your men will face justice for the family you burned. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick." Pike's face went pale. He stared at Ayana. "How do they know my name?" he demanded. "Because I told them everything," she replied. "Every crime. I've been waiting and preparing since I saw what you did." Colton's thoughts scrambled. The pieces fit together at once. Ayana hadn't been captured by chance. She had led them to this place to spring a trap. She had played the long game and pulled the killers into an ambush. For a moment, Colton felt relief, like a weight lifting. Then Pike's face changed. The fear that had edged his eyes twisted into a desperate, ugly calm. He scanned behind Colton, away from the warriors. "Maybe we can't walk away," he said, voice low and murderous, "but I can still finish what I started." Before anyone could stop him, Pike lunged for a small keg of lamp oil near the wall. He smashed it against a support beam, spilling dark liquid over the dry hay. "Back!" he screamed. "Everybody back or this whole place goes up. I'd rather burn than let Apache savages decide my fate." Oil dripped, shining in the dim light. Colton's heart hammered. One match, one spark, and an inferno would trap them all. "You're insane," he said, moving back as the smell of kerosene slid into the air. "That's the idea," Pike snarled. "If I'm dying, I'm taking everyone." "Starting with this Apache witch," Ayana didn't flinch. She stepped closer to Pike, voice steady and fierce. "You killed Martha Morrison while her children watched," she said. "She begged you to spare them. You laughed and told her to shut up." Pike's hand trembled on the match. Color left his face when her words hit home, not because of the courage in her tone, but because the memory in her voice was real. Ayana kept speaking slow and clear. "I watched you burn their home. I heard their screams. I remember their faces." Colton stared at her, horror and awe tangled together. She had seen everything. The house on fire, the family gone, and she'd carried those images and that anger until she could act. The barn smelled of oil and hay and something larger, the shape of what was coming next, the weight of what she carried, the memory of that night, made her calm resolve suddenly make sense. "For 3 days I've been leading you away from other innocent families," Ayana said, voice steady. "Away from villages where you could hurt more people, toward this place where justice waits." The stocky man, clutching his wounded shoulder, darted his eyes between Pike and the dark slick of oil spreading across the floor. "Pike, this is madness. There has to be another way." "There is no other way," Pike snapped, raising the match like a threat. "They'll torture us for names, then kill us slow. At least this way we choose how we go." Outside a voice answered through the night, Nahuel calling, impatient. "Sister, are you safe?" Pike smirked with ugly triumph. "Let's see how much your brother cares when he has to choose between saving you and catching us." As Pike bent to strike the match, Colton's skin went cold. The oil hadn't just spilled by chance. Ayana had been guiding its flow with her foot, shaping a narrow pool that led straight to Pike's boots. Their eyes met for a second, and Colton understood. She'd planned this the moment Pike smashed the keg. The slick formed a ring around Pike, leaving him isolated. "You want to burn something, Pike Morrison?" Ayana said, voice flat. "Then burn alone." She kicked a hidden water barrel in one motion. Water poured out, washing most of the oil away and leaving only the small patch beneath Pike's feet. He looked down and saw the trap. If he struck that match, he'd immolate himself while everyone else stood safe. "Clever little witch," Pike snarled, but his confidence cracked. The wounded man by the barrel, Carl, broke. "Pike, I can't do this. I can't live with what we did to those kids." He stumbled toward the door, hands pressed to his bloody shoulder. "I'm done. I'm surrendering." Pike spat and barked. "Shut your mouth, Carl." Carl kept going anyway. Outside, Nahuel's voice called again, calm and commanding. "Carl Hendricks, come out slow with your hands visible. You'll be treated fairly if you surrender." Colton stared. The Apache leader knew every name. The plan had been mapped down to the smallest detail. Pike watched his ally walk away, match trembling in his hand. "That's one," Ayana said softly. "Two left." The third man, Tom Bradley, who'd been silent through most of the scene, raised his hands. "Pike, she's right. This is over. We can't win." Pike shrieked and waved the match like a madman. "I still have this. I can still make them pay." But Colton saw the oil creeping again, seeping under the planks toward a wider patch. Ayana pointed. "Look down." Pike went pale. The spill had soaked into the wood beneath him. If he lit the match now, the flames would run under the floor. "You did this," Pike whispered, hatred and a rough kind of respect mixed in his voice. "You planned all of this." Ayana met him steady. "From the moment I saw you burn that family, I knew you had to be stopped, and permanently." Tom lowered his hands and started for the door. "I'd rather face Apache justice than burn because you're too proud to quit," he said. As he stepped outside, other sounds came. Horses, wagon wheels, and people from Willowbrook gathering beyond the dark. Pike barked a bitter laugh. "Your whole village came to watch me burn this place down." Ayana shook her head, eyes clear. "No, Pike. They came for something else." The barn door eased open wider, and Colton's mouth fell in shock. Sheriff Marcus Webb of Willowbrook stepped into view with several townsfolk close behind. Yet they weren't carrying rifles or shotguns ready for a fight. They came with bundles of blankets, bandages, and jars of medicine. "Colton!" the sheriff called. "Are you hurt?" Nahuel, standing proud at Ayana's side, answered in a steady voice. "We told them everything. They came as soon as they knew." Pike's head jerked back in disbelief. "You've got to be joking. Settlers and Apache together?" Ayana lifted her chin. "My brother rode to Willowbrook 3 hours ago. He told them of the Morrison family, of the homes you ruined, of the families across this land you left in ashes. He asked them for help in bringing you to justice." Colton's thoughts spun like wagon wheels. While he had been sleeping, while killers trailed Ayana's path, she had woven together an alliance between two peoples who had barely spoken in years. Sheriff Webb moved forward into the barn, his palm resting calm but certain on the pistol at his side. "Pike Morrison," he said in a firm voice, "you're wanted for the murders of Bill and Martha Morrison and their children. You have a choice. Drop the match, surrender, or burn alone while every soul here walks away." "This can't be real," Pike muttered. "Apache don't stand with settlers. Settlers don't put trust in Apache." Ayana's answer came without hesitation. "They do when someone they already trust stands between them. Colton Miles has traded fair with both for years. When Nahuel spoke his name, when he told them I was safe here, it changed everything." Pike's eyes raced between the sheriff, the warriors visible beyond the walls, and the settlers gathered behind him. He stood one man with a match surrounded 20 to 1, standing in a slick of oil that would burn only himself. Ayana's voice cut through the tension. Do you know what will truly shock your village, Pike? Not that an Apache girl escaped a snare, but that she chose to trust enough to bring two peoples together. The match in Pike's hand quivered as his grip weakened. The weight of his fate pressed down, heavy and final. He was surrounded, trapped in oil that threatened only his boots, facing justice from two sides he never thought would stand shoulder to shoulder. "This isn't over," he rasped. The venom in his tone had drained away. "Even if you haul me alive, others will come. More killers. More families will die." "Not while I wear this badge," Webb answered. "Not while we stand as one." Through the barn doors, Colton could hardly believe his eyes. Apache warriors and Willowbrook settlers stood side by side, passing canteens, dividing blankets, sharing supplies. Children peeked out from behind their parents, staring wide-eyed at painted horses and gleaming bows. Elders from both sides examined each other's tools with quiet curiosity, as though walls of fear had been pulled down in a single evening. "You see that?" Ayana said softly, gesturing to the gathering outside. "That's what your hatred tried to break, but instead you helped create something stronger." At last Pike's shoulders sagged. The fight poured out of him like water through a cracked pail. The match slipped from his trembling fingers, landing harmless in the dirt beside the oil. "I only wanted the Morrison gold," he muttered hoarsely. "Heard the old man kept a fortune hidden." "There was no gold," Ayana replied, her voice quiet but heavy with truth. "Bill Morrison was a poor farmer. You slaughtered a family for nothing." The confession struck him like a blow. Pike staggered back as the weight of his crime smothered him. "No," he breathed. "There had to be." "Someone lied to you," Sheriff Webb said coldly, stepping forward with iron shackles in hand. "The way you lied to your men, the way you've lied to yourself." He locked the irons around Pike's wrists. At that moment, Nahuel entered the barn. Tall, broad, eyes sharp as flint, he carried himself with a presence that commanded respect. "Sister," he said to Ayana, "you have done well. Justice is here, and no more families will bleed at their hands." Colton stared in wonder as Nahuel extended his hand toward Sheriff Webb. The two leaders clasped tightly, a handshake that hours before would have been unthinkable. "Sheriff Webb," Nahuel said, "my people would be honored to help your community rebuild what these men have torn down. We have hunters and healers who could serve your people." Webb nodded, his tone steady. "And we have blacksmiths and farmers who can share our knowledge with yours. Perhaps it's time we stop living in fear of one another." Pike was dragged out in chains, head bowed low. Carl and Tom followed, both men almost relieved to face justice rather than fire. As the barn grew quiet, Colton found himself at last alone with Ayana. "You planned this," he said, still shaken by the scale of it. "From the moment I let myself be caught," Ayana answered with a faint smile. "Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to become part of it." 3 months later, Colton stood at the edge of his land, watching a sight that still amazed him every single day. Where Colton's barn had once stood empty and lonely, it now served as the heart of something new. Apache children played freely with settler kids, their laughter carrying across the valley like music. Apache women showed Willowbrook mothers how to recognize healing plants, while settler men demonstrated blacksmithing and plow work to Apache craftsmen. The same barn that had seen a deadly standoff now hosted weekly meetings where both communities mapped out a future, side by side. "Hard to believe it all began with a horse snare," Ayana said, walking up from the village path. A leather satchel hung at her side, filled with herbs, her fingers still dark with soil from tending the garden they now shared. "Hard to believe you planned it all," Colton replied, still shaking his head in wonder. "Not all of it," she admitted with a smile. "I meant to use your barn as a trap. I didn't plan for you to be the kind of man both sides would trust when my brother spoke your name." Sheriff Webb appeared then, leading a few visitors from the territorial government. "Colton, Ayana," he said, "these gentlemen have come to see for themselves. Word of our alliance has reached the capital." One official, a thin man with spectacles, stepped forward. "Miss Ayana, your actions have brought about something this territory has never seen, a peaceful alliance between Apache and settlers, built on justice and respect." "What we've built here," Ayana answered, "proves that people don't need to live in fear of one another. They just need a reason to stand together." The man nodded and scribbled notes. "The governor wants to use your community as an example for others, to show them what's possible." As they spoke, more families arrived for the evening gathering. The Morrison children's graves had been marked with stones carved by both peoples, and their killers had faced judgment. Pike Morrison had swung for his crimes, while Carl and Tom received prison for their part in helping capture him. "There's more," Sheriff Webb said quietly. Word came from the territorial marshal. Pike's gang had marked 3 more families. "Because we stopped them when we did, those families are alive and safe." Ayana's eyes lowered with solemn pride. "That's what mattered most, keeping them from hurting anyone else." The sun sank lower as families filled the barn. Elders shared lessons on planting cycles, farmers and hunters compared tools, and children traded words and stories in both English and Apache. "You know what really surprised this town?" Colton asked, watching the joyful scene. "What?" Ayana said. "It wasn't just that you escaped or that you brought justice," he replied. "It was that you trusted us enough to believe we could rise above our old fears." Ayana smiled, watching a young Apache boy teach a settler girl how to braid rope. "Trust has to start somewhere. I decided it would start with me." The barn filled with laughter and voices, as 2 peoples once divided now worked as one. And at the center of it all stood the young Apache, woman whose courage turned suspicion into hope, showing that sometimes the strongest weapon against injustice is the willingness to trust in something better. If you enjoyed this story, click the video now to watch another Western tale, where courage and determination meet in ways you never imagined. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep these stories alive. Your support means the world.